All right, I have 6:30. Let's call the May 2020 City Council regular meeting to order. As we have done for the last several months, we are engaging in good social distancing practices. We are all at least 6 feet apart. We've got masks, and we're doing the same in regard to staff and anyone else that is here as well. Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Byrd.
Present.
Peters. Garcia.
Here.
Trethewey.
Here.
Arnshorst.
Here.
Corbin. Here. Hoekstra.
Here.
Raymond.
Here.
Mayor Box.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. As is our tradition, we will open tonight's meeting with a prayer by City Manager Keith Van Beek, immediately followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. We'd ask that you would join us if you will. Mr. Van Beek.
Thank you, and if you're so inclined, please join me in prayer. Father God, we thank you in the midst of these troubling times that you never change, that you provide for us in a wide and varied ways. In these times, we ask for safety for our workers, city and other, that are providing for people in large and small ways. We ask for wisdom for council this evening as they consider the business of the city. May they represent all those who need you in a special way. We ask for grace and mercy for our larger communities. We experience sickness, in some cases death, but also in the economic impacts that are impacting people in so many ways. We also particularly lift before you our friends, and in my case, colleagues in Midland, in the city and in the county, and just the tremendous impact that they've had with flooding on top of the current situation. So we ask for your protection and your peace to them in these times. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next are our consent agenda items. The items that are on the consent agenda are items that are deemed to be relatively routine. Some have already been reviewed by council, and it is our tradition to enact them with one motion, unless a member of the audience or a member of the council asks to have a particular item removed from the council or from the agenda. If it is removed from the consent agenda, it will be placed on the regular agenda in its regular order. Are there any members of the public who would like to have an item removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda? Seeing none. Members of council, anyone like to remove something from the consent agenda and have it placed on the regular agenda?
No.
Seeing, and actually, I should have had you read the consent agenda first. I was hoping we'll do that, and then we'll ask again. Kathy, would you please read the items on the consent agenda?
Approval of meeting minutes, May 13th, 2020 regular meeting. Oaths of office. Holland Board of Public Works, Memorandum of Understanding for Macatawa Area Coordinating Council, Stormwater Grant. Holland Board of Public Works, Declaration of Surplus Material. Holland Board of Public Works, MERS Retiree Health Funding Vehicle Trust Agreement. Approve agreements with Beach Drive property owners to address road flooding related to high lake levels. Quarterly investment report. Approve vehicle purchases, police vehicle purchases. Macatawa Area Coordinating Council, Stormwater Grant Agreement. Principal Shopping District Board Appointment.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. And my apologies for that. I always review the consent agenda ahead of time, and I always assume everybody else has as well, but I'll ask the questions again. Are there any members of the audience who would like to remove an item from the consent agenda and have it placed on the regular agenda? Seeing none. Council, same question. Anyone like to remove anything from the consent agenda and have it placed on the regular agenda? Seeing none there, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to adopt agenda as presented.
Moved by Trethewey. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Airsource.
Wait.
Any discussion? And could we have a roll call vote, please, Kathy?
Byrd.
Yes.
Peters.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Trethewey.
Yes.
Arnshorst.
Yes.
Corbin? Yes. Hoekstra?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
And Mayor Box?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next item is our public comment period. If there are any members of the audience, which in looking around, I do not believe we have any members of the public here this evening, this would be the time that you would be able to address council. Knowing that we have not had much in-person participation, we have set up an email address, publiccomment@cityofholland.com, where you can send your public comments to us. We did receive some public comments through email this week, and we'll be receiving them officially later on in the agenda. But I will ask just for the formality of it, are there any members of the public who would like to address council at this point? Seeing none, I will close the public comment period. And we'll move on to special order of the day, public hearings. A public hearing on the petition to the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Mr. Van Beek, could you fill us in on this?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Council. Let me give a little background on this first. Then I will go through specifically what's in the recommendation and then talk about the process that would be followed to close up my comments before the public hearing and any questions or discussion you might have. First, this reflects potential action based upon Public Act 72 of 2020, which local representative, not of the city, but just north, Representative Jim Lilly, worked very hard on and was signed into law by the governor, I think just in April of this year. And what it does is it amends prior law and allows for a 6-month temporary water control zone. And that is the recommendation that we are making to you this evening. I will let you know that the law actually allows for 2 separate 6-month iterations of this. And in the recommendation tonight, we would say it would be 6 months from the date of final adoption, should this move forward. And then it would allow for next year, if necessary, that we could follow a similar process and a similar 6-month temporary water control zone could go in. I will mention that potentially in the future, should this be something that you would want to pursue, there is an allowance under the current law that the DNR has investigated and is suggesting that there's a much longer process. Some of you that have been here before are aware of that longer process because it is long. That would allow for what they're calling a tiered water level system, which basically would allow for one set of rules as it relates to Lake Macatawa in this instance to be in place under high water conditions and another set of rules to be in place under low water conditions. And that would be driven basically by a reading of the water. I'll just let you know that in conversations with other local officials and with the county who does enforcement on Lake Macatawa and the Coast Guard, that would be the recommendation should you want to put something in place more long-term. Excuse me. Now, back to specifically the recommendation before you. The City of Holland and both Holland Township and Park Township have discussed this extensively via Zoom and other methods since the new legislation went in place. And largely, we worked with the County Marine Patrol Unit that is always responsible for enforcement on Lake Macatawa, and also the Coast Guard and their auxiliary unit. And what we attempted to do is balance the legitimate property interests of property owners that are experiencing property damage along Lake Macatawa, also with safety issues that are present under the high water levels, submerged docks, additional things floating in the lake, those types of things, but also with the communicated with some of our partners importance of boating that represents to the larger boating public and being able to have access onto Lake Macatawa. The recommendation was made by the Marine Patrol Unit and agreed. So the information before you tonight has, it's the same information that tonight is before you, and tomorrow night will go before both Park and Holland Townships. So it's the same in effect, the same resolution, obviously with different, municipalities in the resolution, but it's in effect the same resolution and the same application to the DNR asking for a consistent set of temporary local control measures. We feel that's very important because without the agreement of all three entities, I think the possibility of the DNR acting upon and recommending back to us an ordinance may be questionable if that would happen. So I think it's important, and we felt it was important as the three entities that we all make similar recommendations to all of the governing bodies. The process, just so you're aware before I go into showing you the map of current and proposed, is that again, that theoretically you would consider and adopt the resolution this evening, which would direct me to submit the application on behalf of the city to the DNR. They would theoretically receive the same application from the City of Holland, from Park Township, and from Holland Township. And then, as is in the legislation, the DNR has a period of time to review that information and everything that was in the application, and then would propose an ordinance applying to all of Lake Macatawa that would come back again to the three governing entities, and then you would take one final action, basically supporting or not supporting that resolution with the temporary control ordinances that the DNR ultimately would propose. Excuse me. If I can draw your attention to the screen, I think the best way to describe what currently is in place is the map, which as it relates to the City of Holland, the red areas are no wake areas for all vessels currently. And you will see that in the City of Holland, there are a few sections where that certainly does exist. The yellow sections are where there's no wake, but it is only for vessels that are 26 feet or larger. Vessels that are smaller than 26 feet have no wake restrictions in those areas. In consultation, as I described earlier, with the townships, with the County Marine Patrol and the Coast Guard, the recommendation before you this evening, and something happened here, I apologize, all the black actually is in red in the documents in your packet, but the areas in black show that now there is a 200-foot no wake from the shore and docks and piers, completely encircling all of Lake Macatawa, which we think does definitely provide a level of protection and safety for the property owners that doesn't exist in all these areas now. And you will see the area commonly referred to as the Narrows, that does also encompass some of the area in the City of Holland, would now be no wake for all vessels, not just those vessels over 26 feet. There is an additional change quite a far out to the west in Park Township where that no wake zone was extended slightly. But for your purposes, quite frankly, that is outside of anything where really it's referenced in our resolution, but it is noted that that is solely in Park Township. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Hopefully I've described to you not only the new legislation, but also the process that we went through and why we are making the recommendations that we are this evening. Thank you.
All right, at this point, I will open it up for public hearing. Is there anyone here in the public that would like to speak in regard to this position and proposed resolution? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. What is the pleasure of council?
Motion to adopt the resolution.
Moved by Trethewey to adopt the resolution. Is there support? Support by Byrd. Discussion, questions from council?
I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Aaronsource.
The manager, Mr. Van Beek. You mentioned this is there are 2 iterations of this. One that would take place should this pass by all jurisdictions and then get passed by the DNR. And then another 6-month time that would be next year. Would this process have to be gone through again the same? It's a long, even though it's shorter than the 3-tiered one. Would it be started earlier? Because unfortunately, of course, this is Memorial Weekend and this is already an
Sure.
issue. So,
Very good question. My understanding of how this would work, again, assuming that all the jurisdictions in the DNR would approve this, is it would create a 6-month period of time this year that this would go into effect.
right.
It's a modified process should all the jurisdictions want to do the same thing next year. So instead of doing this multi-step process this year, my understanding is all the jurisdictions could choose to employ this method for a defined 6-month period next year. So this process that we're doing right now is submitting an application, sending it to the DNR, waiting for that to come back to us, and then taking final action at that point. My understanding is that next year, should all 3 entities desire, we could do an evaluation of the conditions, high water levels, maybe lower water levels, and we could one more time, but only one more time under law, we could do a temporary iteration of this again for a defined 6-month period. So I think what you were driving at is we could get ahead of it in a way that we couldn't this year, because again, this legislation only opened up in April.
Yes.
So I think we've responded to this as quickly as we could, and it's going to take some time before it would be in place this year. But next year, all 3 local entities, my understanding is we could do this and maybe have it in place pre-Memorial Day, for example.
Good, thank you. Yeah, that's what
You're welcome.
Great. Mr. Corbin.
So there will come with, you're gonna have to mark this in some way or some fashion. Who's paying for the cost of marking these designated zones?
Correct. So a couple things. One would be buoys. And in the city of Holland, we've always had buoys out and marked, and they've been placed, as I turn around and look at Matt Van Dyken. And so we would just, should this go through, when the effective date would come, we would adjust those buoys or put a different sign out. But really, the majority of this is not that we would, for example, buoy 200 feet completely around the lake, but rather what would happen is this, Councilman Corbin, this map is on signs, for example, in the city of Holland at Collin Park. And this map is distributed in brochures, but also is at, I think, every public launching point of boats that access Lake Macatawa. So what we would do is we would turn around and we would get this sign instead, and we would use that as at least one of the primary education efforts to make sure that people are aware of what the rule is.
Ms. Aaronsource.
I think, okay, I will. The other issue would be enforcement. So it's here, and how do we enforce? Because there's always, seems to be a dearth of enforcers when you need them, the patrolling.
That's enforcement is always an interesting question, and some people love enforcement and some people don't like enforcement. So If there's enough or not enough is a question that I won't address. But the county Marine Patrol is the entity that does enforcement on Lake Macatawa and the other waters throughout Ottawa County. We're very appreciative of that service that they do. The City of Holland does not have any enforcement, and I'm not aware of any other local unit that does any enforcement on their waters either. And then the Coast Guard does some level of education, maybe occasional enforcement. But we already have that in place through the County Marine Patrol, so they would be the entity that would be both educating and assisting us with education, but would be doing the enforcement.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Quincy?
Yes, so you talked about the education piece. How does that work for individuals who are coming in through the channel? Will we be putting a sign out in that area, or I guess how would that work?
I'm going to ask some of the boaters maybe that come in through that way. I think there are some signs, but Quincy, I don't think there's probably the ability to do the signs that would completely catch everyone that comes into boats. But I know that more common boaters, of which I'm not in that way of doing a lot of Lake Michigan navigation. They're aware that when they come into a harbor such as this, that there is a level of responsibility and, quite frankly, risk that they take, where if they don't know what the navigational rules are on that, they're taking on some risk of their own. So I think they're aware of the various sites, whether it be at the state or other, to look up the most recent navigational rules and then abide by those. All right.
Great. Anyone else? Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Peters?
Yes.
Garcia?
Yes.
Trethewey?
Yes.
Arnsworth?
Yes.
Corbin?
Yes.
Hoekstra?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Byrd?
Yes.
Mayor Box?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next item is written petitions and communications. And as I referenced earlier, we have received a number of written communications through our public comment email, publiccomment@cityofholland.com. Kathy, could you give us just a quick listing of what it was that was received? Those are all in the packet and available online, but we're just receiving them officially now. Could you just let us know what those are?
They are. For the community energy plan, we received a public comment from Hannah Huggett, DeYoung, Rosshafer. Oh, I'm sorry. Rosshafer was the no wake zone. Point View Condo Association's no wake. Kamica, no wake. Knoll, no wake. Kuiper, no wake. Hamilton, reopening of downtown. Miller, property tax follow-up. And Ashby, climate change.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll entertain a motion to accept those into the record.
So,
Moved by Trethewey. Is there support? Support. Support by Hoekstra. Any discussion? And I believe we can do this by a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And I believe the next item that we have is communications from the city manager.
Yes, thank you. Sorry to have to listen to me a little bit more. I'll try to be brief. I have 3 items. First, just to continue to let mayor and council know, but also the viewing public, we continue to closely monitor any changes or direction with the stay-at-home order and orders from the state. And as communicated before, we continue to stand ready and have our plans in place for the city organization to return to work. Really proud of our team that has been working on that. We're targeting right now, unless something would change from the state, a more full return to work for those employees that have not been back on Monday, June 1. But again, we're monitoring that as various ones of our entities, largely the police department, is involved with various elements of that stay-at-home order. Transitioning then, today we had another very successful farmers market. It's the third day of the farmers market at this point, and I would like to just emphasize once again, as periodically we get questions about this, farmers markets are allowed under the executive order, which is why we are doing that, and the guidelines that we're employing follow both the executive order and guidelines put out by the Farmers Market Association of Michigan. Additionally, downtown, the DDA and the PSD reviewed information and recommendation from staff and have unanimously voted to pursue flexibility really driven by the individual request of the various tenants for flexibility for patrons, whether that be selling products or seating people at restaurants on sidewalks and parking spaces. Want to emphasize again, though, that that is subject to the stay-at-home order, so any of this would only potentially go in place when the guidelines from the state would allow for it. We have, council will be very familiar with, we have a process administratively for the request for use of city facilities. And this is what we typically would do, for example, for events such as the Street Performer Series or many of the other things that happen in the downtown space. So we would be using that administrative process to approve, consider and approve any requests from those owners in those spaces. I will outline for people that unanimous vote by the DDA and PSD at this point is only for sidewalk areas and parking areas, if you can envision our downtown space. They have separated out and not made a determination yet for anything as it relates to the travel lanes, if you would, in 8th Street. I think there's a lot of question about that and maybe not quite the same unanimity of thought by all of the downtown tenants. So we have separated those two questions, and that may or may not be something that they would like to pursue with the city at a later date. I will point out that we will obviously have requirements for anyone that seats or sells anything in those parking spaces, that there will be appropriate and necessary separations from the seating, parking areas, and the travel surface to make sure that for kids or otherwise don't dart out into traffic or anything like that. So we're excited about that. I would especially like to call out the fantastic efforts by our downtown group and our staff, led by Matt Van Dyken, but Kara and Amy at the DDA and PSD have just done a fantastic job in modified ways, working from home and with Zoom meetings, supporting our downtown businesses, but quite frankly, this would be something that we'd pursue in other areas also. So just to let you know that. And then finally, a piece of encouraging news is that for some of you, you're aware that there was a very busy planning commission meeting here recently, and they're busy for a lot of reasons. We're still trying to go through the very involved work of the updated Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO, but they also have some exciting projects in front of them. And we know today that there were additional submittals to the planning staff that will go on the upcoming planning commission agenda. So it probably will be a very busy agenda, and quite frankly, I know planning staff is looking at potentially having additional meetings. And the reason is because in the midst of all of this, we continue to have people that are interested in development in the city of Holland and investing in the city of Holland with projects big and small, which I thought deserved a little extra attention tonight, and just wanted to underscore that there is hope, there is interest, And there's still investment that we expect to have happen in the city of Holland, which is really exciting news. And that's all that I have. Thank you.
Mr. Tuthui, you had a question or comment?
Yes, I do. Keith, I've got some major concern, and I hope this gets passed to the DDA, PSD, along through our liaison and staff, that opening up the street to traffic and also having people sit in the bump outs is asking for catastrophe. We have been very strategic in placing sidewalks around the city because we don't want them too close to the roads. And now you're putting, I understand during parades and everything else, you get people, but we also keep them back. The chance of something going awry mechanically, physically with somebody and running through some people there just does not appeal to me at all. I would ask and suggest very strongly that if they're going to do something like that, they're going to totally close off the street or totally keep it open, one way or the other. Can't have it both.
We'll pass on that concern, and certainly, as I think I outlined, and I don't know if we'll completely satisfy that, but we're making sure that should we do anything out there, whether it be your suggestion that we'll pass on or the situation that we'd have, that safety of everyone is the utmost concern.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments for city manager? Great, thank you, Keith. Appointments, motions, communications from the mayor. Just want to applaud the DDA and the PSD for working hard to support local businesses, trying to do as much as possible. Also want to remind folks that yes, you can still eat downtown, you can still shop downtown, and there are two great websites that we've put together. Shopdowntownholland.com. You can shop online, you can pick things up. Many of the local retailers are doing that, and please do support our local businesses through this. And then the other is Dine Downtown Holland. I actually did that myself before the meeting tonight, did an online order and took care of it, paid for it, and just picked it up right there without contact with anybody, and it was wonderful and great to be able to support the downtown businesses. Also, as Keith mentioned, Farmers Market is still open on Wednesdays and on Saturdays. We also have the Downtown Relief Fund, and the deadline for that, I believe, was on Monday to be able to get those applications in. So if you've got an application in, you should be hearing from the West Coast Chamber of Commerce and the Community Foundation, hopefully in the near future. And then also we want to make sure that our nonprofit organizations in this community continue to survive and then thrive beyond this. And one of the biggest in the community is the Tulip Time Festival. Not only does it give us the opportunity to showcase this beautiful community, our tulips and our heritage, it is also an economic driver for this community with $48 million of new money coming in every year. We want to make sure that that continues. So Tulip Time Festival has a GoFundMe. You can GoFundMe.com/tuliptime and help stand with Tulip Time so that we can make sure that that festival continues for another 90 years and beyond. And then the last, I just wanted to reiterate, we did vote to request that the DNR to expand the no-wake zone. That's not going to be in place this weekend. It was a beautiful 75-degree sunny day here in Holland. It's likely to be a very good weekend and great weather to come. Lots of people out there on boats. Even though the law does not yet reflect that no-wake zone, I would encourage boaters to be kind and courteous, not only to our friends and neighbors who live along the lake, but also in regard to their own community resources. There are lots of road ends, lots of public property that affronts the lake, and those waves do damage that ultimately cost taxpayers dollars. And if you can slow down just a bit, if you can keep those wakes down, maybe we can keep the taxes down at the same time. So it is your own money that you're saving by doing that. And then next, I have appointments, motions, communications from council members. Any communications from council members? All right, seeing none. Next item, would entertain a motion to go into closed session for two items. One is a strategy session connected with the negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement at the request of the city negotiating staff. and B, for the periodic personnel evaluation of our city manager pursuant to a written request for a closed session. So I would entertain a motion to that effect.
Motion to go into closed session for stated reasons.
Moved by Trethewey. Is there support? Support by Byrd. And I would also like to note that council will not be taking any action following this closed session. We will be coming out of closed session merely to adjourn the meeting. Is there any discussion on the motion? Kathy, would you please call the roll?
Garcia,
Yes.
Trethewey,
Yes.
Arnthorst,
Yes.
Corbin, Hoekstra,
Yes.
Raymond,
Yes.
Byrd,
Yes.
Peters. Mayor Box,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you. And before you get packed up too much, we are going to be staying here in chambers. We're just going to be turning off the cameras and closing the doors. This is a much larger space. So with that, we will be signing off and heading into closed session.
Adios.